Hello, I'm Scott Nelson of the Two Bridges Art Academy. If you'd like to learn a little bit on how I approach my paintings, maybe you can follow along with this demonstration video and possibly learn something new. Now, it's not necessary for you to type out your actual action plan, I call them, but if it's something you think would be helpful, please do so. So follow along as I go through my step-by-step process that's often happened inside my head. But for today, let's take a look through my thought process. Whenever possible, please sketch out on location. Go to the actual location, do sketches from 360-degree rotation around your subject matter, or when possible, or check out the conditions. You really start to let it sink inside your head what you're seeing. That's when you're going to be painting back in your studio versus actually on site. And of course, if possible, paint on site. That's an important thing to do. If you're unable to do that, bring along some colors with you. Sometimes it's a good idea to sense what you're happening in those lighting conditions and what the paints that you have and how you're going to be able to mix them. So that's another good thing for you to do is create almost thumbnail sketches in color, or at very least swatches to kind of anticipate what's going to be happening in your palette. And then next thing I'd like to say is pick the sketch of your location that is of most interest to you. I put that in parentheses specifically because it's really important for you to want to paint what you're painting. Often my students, I'll give them a subject matter and I'll say, let's paint it, and they're happy to do so. But I also know realistically, if you're not inspired by what you're painting, it can be kind of dragged out. So the fact of the matter is, the best thing to do to make yourself happy with the paintings is to really enjoy the subject matter, something about the location, the history, whatever that might be, but inspire yourself and the paint will come out better for that. So again, pick the interest, something interesting in the painting that is important to you. Next, pick out a canvas size. Are you going to work small? Are you going to work large? That's something that's going to dictate your final piece, of course. Next thing on my action plan would be what medium. I'm going to work in a watercolor for this demonstration video, but if I was to work in oil or acrylic or gouache, colored pencil or ink, I would be completely thinking through the same process, but some of these questions that I'm asking and answering would be different. So today my answer to that question is I'm going to work in watercolor. So from that point on, the rest of the questions will be indicative of the supplies and the specifics to watercolor and the natures they possess. So I'm going to begin watercolor, as I said. What kind of paper? I often feel it's best to use the paper that you practice with the paper that you're going to paint with. Sometimes it's paper. Watercolor paper can be expensive. I personally prefer Arches. It's my favorite. I might be tempted to practice on a different kind of a cheaper paper, but the fact of the matter is, when you're doing some testing, you want to make sure that translates right to your final piece. So I'm going to use Arches paper. What kind of paint? I am going to lean into my paint of choice, which is Winsor & Newton. I have other paints, of course, in my palette, many different options, but I think I'm going to use my Winsor & Newton. That's something I'm going to decide now and try my best to stick with it. Consider your paint in order and techniques and how you like to use them. The subject matter I'm going to now show you here is, I'm going to show my sketches, I'm going to show you my photo references. Here is the location, and I have two different views of photographs I've taken of them. I also drew them. I'm going to talk about them in a minute. But as I look through my different options here, I'm going to start taking note of things that might become a problem. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But see how my sky is very similar to the body of my house? That could become a problem as far as visually representing an interest in value change. So what I might consider doing is, even though the sky here is essentially a blue, an even tone blue, I might actually add some dry brush clouds in there too to give it a directional interest, to create something that's happening behind this building, to set the sky further back, because what I don't want this painting to do is look flat. And you can see it, of course, right in this particular image here. So dry brushing technique would be something I would consider doing. Cast shadows is something else that in my sketches I certainly picked up on. I'm going to talk about them again in a second. But when I look at these two different photographs, if I'm leaning towards this image that I think I'm going to paint, these cast shadows, because this building is backlit, are running this direction towards me, and you can see him a little bit more here from the access road that went in front of this location. So I might accentuate those things. So that's a subject thing I'm going to really lean into, is the cast shadows from this backlight. I know I'm a fan of working wet into wet, and also my glazing techniques I'll probably utilize. So for the most part, those are the things I'm going to think about doing as far as the order. Of course, we always work from the background to the foreground, and then the background, middle ground, foreground. That's what I'll be sticking with as well. So I'm anticipating what's the challenges going to happen in the watercolor. And then another thing I often talk to my students about is adjusting the composition and eliminating unneeded details. The fact of the matter is, sometimes you'll find there's a trash can or an automobile or something that's in the photograph reference you've taken that you don't want. It doesn't really add to the painting. You're allowed to change those and edit them out. So do that. In this case, there's a little trash can or some sort of wooden box right here that I can kind of see back there. And I remember that specifically because I was on location. I said, I don't think that's going to strengthen the painting, so I might edit that out. For the most part, everything else, though, I like. Actually, there's an automobile parked right back here. Probably get rid of that. And then problem spots. What am I looking at in my photographs here that might become a problem? Again, when I was on site doing the drawing, what you see with the naked eye is very different than what a photograph takes. That's sometimes the challenges of working plein air or working in the studio and all the things in between. And you'll see the reflection off of the windows right here. Not too bad right there. You can see some interesting shadows and some light effects that are happening with the branches from the trees being cast into the shadows. Interesting visually. This one is completely blown out, and for the most part, there is some window panes there. So I can now see them in this view. So if I am to lean into this particular view, what do I do? Do I render it like that? Do I go to my photo reference? I think in my mind, it'll be probably somewhere in the middle. I'll suggest some window panes, but I won't render each one specifically because to me, that's not that important. The details of window panes isn't going to make or break this painting. It's just something to consider as a problem spot. Now let's take a look at my sketches. On location, I did work my way around this entire building using my charcoal. Starting off in the back of the building, I really was impressed by the shadows that I saw cast on the side of the building. Visually, that was very interesting. I like the branches that worked their way into across the scene as well. So I did like this view. I really did. It might be a keeper. The front of the building, where you can actually kind of see on the visually represented where this automobile is located, was pretty much from this view looking on that side. And although it's very interesting, I'm not saying it's boring, but it doesn't really intrigue me. So I'll go back to my action plan here. Pick the sketch that is of most interest to you, and this one is not. So I can put that one aside. Now I take a look at this other view here, and it's the opposite side. It's this side of the building. I've adjusted from this side over here, and it's visually interesting. I do like the cast shadows that are being really coming into the scene from outside, from behind me, because again, this building was backlit when I was there. So I do like this. This is something that might make a nice painting, but visually, this location, this beautiful location, this historical building, is not normally seen from this view. If I was to paint this, would anybody even know where it is? Again, sometimes you want to paint because you're excited by it. But I did like the fact that for shadows, I like this view. But the thing that interested me the most is going back to, I like this door. You don't see it from the other side, but there's open doors where back in the day, I guess they used to put, automobiles would actually drive inside little Model Ts. They'd be stored right inside that little storage part. Hard to believe when you look at that photo, but that garage right there has kind of a history to it. They also sold tobacco and some, dry goods and things like that out of this location. So I think if I have that door represented, it's going to make for a better story that can be told in this painting. So after all said and done, I think I'm leaning towards this particular sketch that you can kind of see here for my photo. It's a different view because doing a sketch and location versus doing a photograph, completely different sometimes experience. But I do like the things I'm seeing here. So this one intrigues me. I like the stairway, like the fence, I like that door as mentioned. I think I'm going to go this direction. So once again, I've created my action plan. I've gone through my checklist. A lot of the times I'm doing this in my head. Today I wrote it down so you could kind of follow along my thought process. But at the end of the day, now what I want to do is start painting. Sometimes it's hard to get going. Let's get going. Now I'm going to work on some Arches cold press watercolor paper. The one thing about Arches, in most watercolor papers, is they come in two different sides. This is a little bit rougher on this side, and the side I'm going to work with is a little smoother, not by much, but just a little smoother. So make sure you take note of that when you're using watercolor paper, so check both sides. You also note that I haven't taped my watercolor paper down. That's a discussion, it's a personal preference, but when you tape your paper down, you pre-soak it, wet it, and it stretches out the paper. It lays nice and flat, and it will not buckle and move on you. 140-pound paper, which what this is, I feel doesn't buckle much, and if it does a little bit, it's a personal preference, but I like the fact that my water and paint will flow a little bit on the paper with a little bit of haphazardness. So that's a personal preference, but again, I'm not taping my paper down. I have done some pre-drawing, which I'll talk about in a second, and I've used a 2H pencil. Okay, that's it, versus the B pencils that I often draw in my classes with. The reason I want to use an H pencil is I want my line work to be very light, so it'll be covered up by the paint. So I'll get closer to the camera here in a second, but you really can't see much of my line work on camera just yet. Additionally, I have made some composition choices, which I go over a lot in my Two Bridges Art Academy classes, in my drawing classes. The paper I'm choosing to use is going to be a 16 by 20 format, but I've actually cut the paper at a 17 by 21. This will allow me to float the paper if I decide to frame and mat this a little bit higher, lower, left, or right inside the mat. I will often have my image a little bit right or a little bit left, high or low, never in the center. So looking at this, you'll actually take note that the point of interest is to the side here. That was by design. Again, something I cover in my drawing classes. Here's my line work, as you can barely see, but I often like to say that a lot of the drawing I do, I'll do it actually with my paintbrush. So that's a personal preference that when I do my paintings, that I don't need to draw every single detail. I just need suggestive lines that I've already done to kind of map out where I'm going to go. And the fact of the matter is, most of what I'll do will be done with a brush. Now for my sky here, I'm actually just rolling the brush. I'm dragging it at directional strokes here and just rolling the brush with my fingertips. I'm a very light glaze, don't want a lot of pigment on there. Rolling the brush, creating some visual interest in the sky. In other words, otherwise, somewhat of a boring blue sky that's going to conflict with the color of this building. So rolling the brush, dragging it. So concern often is to try to add too much details too quickly. And right now I'm just trying to stick with my plan of just working on some of those middle ground suggested colors. No detail, just the suggestion of colors. This tree line right here, just going to tap it in, a little bit of dragging, a little bit of very little painting goes involved, just tapping it in there. A suggestive color, it's going to, of course, dry lighter. And that's all I'm going to do is just suggest where I'm seeing some color as it goes around this diffuse light that I'm trying to capture. And then more of that. I'm using a transparent colors right now. Nothing opaque about it. Everything's got a lot of water. A lot of, dry, of course. Watercolors always dry lighter. Keep that in mind. So don't be afraid to just allow the brush to do the work, rolling it, dragging it, tapping. A lot of loose qualities that I'm trying to capture right now, because everything here, the detail is going to be at the front of this painting. The details of the barn door and the rocks right here will be the focal point. Everything in the background, the leaves and the individual sticks and moments, things, those are just background support and cast characters, I like to call them. So don't focus on the detail until it's important later in the process. As I continue to work on this painting, you'll hear me use this word transparent. Well, what does that mean? As I hold up the piece of artwork closer to the camera, you'll see sections where you can actually see right through the paint itself and still see the paper or the canvas surface. Where another section, let's say for example over near this tree, I placed down a little quick section of opaque paint. It completely covers the paper, you can't see through it as much. So a good painting with a combination of opaque and transparent will give it some depth. So I've mentioned I would like to do a little bit of dry brushing throughout this painting, and I have been, but one thing I haven't talked about is the use of a scrub brush. You can see this is a unique brush that it's a round brush that half of it's been cut off, but you can actually purchase a full out scrub brush. But the idea behind it is you can dip in a little bit of paint, and I'm just going to suggest that there's a little background color here and behind this foliage here to add a color. But it's very easy to do with just a little bit of paint and a background accent is being added through just scrubbing on some color. So less of a painterly stroke and more of just a scrubbing dry brush action. Well, here's the final painting. It's a 16 by 20. I've matted it and also placed it in an appropriate frame that would highlight some of the colors that we have here. Now I would like to take a look back at my action plan that I started off the video with. And did I accomplish everything I set out to do? Let's check it out. I worked with my dry brush as suggested. You can see some certain techniques in the rocks and the trees and some of the foliage or the grass that was in front of the building. I have cast shadows with that backlit light coming through here, coming towards the viewer. That's a nice touch. I felt happy with that. I did some work, of course, wet into wet, my favorite artwork to do, solid painting, I should say. Glazing was also something I revisited throughout the entire painting with my transparent colors. I also altered the sky, as mentioned, with the fear that the color of the building was going to be very close to the sky color. I added some clouds and with directional strokes, and you can see that it kind of leads your eye further back as opposed to just a flat color in front of a flat color. As far as the composition change, the only thing I really did was there was a breakdown lane here on the road that I eliminated. Felt it was going to be a distraction. Wasn't really needed to kind of pull you into the artwork. So I just eliminated that altogether and really showcased those shadows on the road that were coming at us. So again, having an action plan is something I highly suggest you do. And in this case, I'm looking back. Did I accomplish it all? I hope I did. Well, thank you for watching my video. I had a lot of fun painting this historical Mendon, Massachusetts building you see behind me in watercolor. I went to the site, I worked around the building, did some nice sketches. Then I decided to come back to my studio and do a painting here where it was more comfortable. So if you're interested in doing that yourself, please just grab a pencil, grab your sketchbook, get your paints on site, or like I did, come back to your own location and do some painting. But the fact of the matter is you just got to get out there and do it. So I hope you learned something, and I hope you come back and visit us soon. Thank you very much for watching.